All right, so this is our final panel of the day, and a very important one for all of us that handle cases that are difficult and frightening and heart-wrenching. It's really dealing with how do you deal with those cases, and how do you deal with the wellness of your court and the wellness of yourself. And we have a great panel today to talk to us about that. First, we're going to hear from Cheryl Demert-Fairbanks. Cheryl, as most of you know, is Tlingit Tsimshian and an Indian law attorney and a judge at several places, the Nevada Intertribal Court of Appeals. And she, man, I think my prescription is about gone on the transition lenses. She's on the Nevada Intertribal Court of Appeals as an associate justice, and her legal practice and consultation services concentrate on tribal-state relations, personnel, tribal courts, peacemaking and family conferencing, mediation, family, school, educational, and indigenous law. She's been a visiting professor at both Lewis and Clark and the University of New Mexico's Southwest Indian Law Clinic. She's a former senior policy analyst in state tribal relations for the New Mexico Office of Indian Affairs, and was instrumental in establishing the Indian Child Welfare Desk, New Mexico Office of Indian Tourism, the University of New Mexico Indian Law Clinic, and the passage of the New Mexico Indian Arts and Crafts Act. She's also a member of our board and has worked a lot in this area for tribes throughout the country. Next is Deborah Dungan. She's the Attorney Administrative Assistant to the Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court. In addition to her law degree, she holds a BA in Child Development, an MS in Family and Human Relations, and an MA in Grief and Loss Counseling with a school counseling certificate. That is a lot of college. She has provided training to judges, lawyers, and advocates on secondary trauma, compassion, fatigue, and communication, mediation, and facilitation skills. Deborah has been meditating for more than 20 years. It is meditating and not mediating, both, and is currently enrolled in a mindfulness meditation teacher training program. When she's not working, she's an avid walker and a curious cook, and I'm going to have to figure out what that is from her after the presentation. And then finally, we have Lori Vilas. Lori comes from the White Earth Nation and is currently the Mille Lacs Band's tribal court peacemaker. Her caseload primarily involves custody, visitation, and guardianship matters. She's been doing restorative justice work and peacemaking, primarily on reservations, but in other systems as well, for over 20 years. She's worked in schools with children with emotional behavior disorders and in a Native American group home, serving youth ages 8 to 18. She was the circle coordinator for Mahnomen County, Minnesota. I always have trouble with the Minnesota, Michigan names. And there collaboratively implemented a sentencing circle for youth offenders to reduce recidivism. The secret to success there was to bridge the gap between communities in order to build and strengthen them. Lori worked with returning citizens, prisoner reentry for the Northwest Indian OIC to reduce recidivisms. In all these positions, peacemaking circles were used to resolve conflicts. So first we're going to hear from Judge Fairbanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. When NAICJA decided to put judicial wellness on the agenda, I had just suggested it, and then I saw my name, and I thought, whoa, don't anyone suggest anything, because Cammie Hart did the same thing, and then she got on the judicial leadership. So I want to thank the panel, though, for coming forward, because this is such an important piece, because as the judiciary, we're really dealing with lives of our people, kids, elders, community members. And so we call this trauma, vicarious trauma, and the day-to-day grind of hearing cases. And we choose health, and not just self-care, but extreme self-care. So keep that in mind. And so the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And so as we move toward judicial wellness, we realize that cases do take its toll on us, and not just us, but our families, our friends, our loved ones. and then repeatedly hearing those cases, especially involving child custody, divorce, domestic violence, homicide, domestic violence, does affect us in many ways, and we could result in what's known as compassion fatigue. I didn't know what the heck that was, compassion fatigue, but I knew I had the symptoms. But anyways, so we looked at fatigue and vicarious trauma, and 500 judges were surveyed, and as to the effect of the court calendar, the docket, 105 judges responded, and 63% said yes, they really had work-related compassion fatigue. And what is vicarious trauma? I think we all more or less know what it is, but the experience of bearing witness to atrocities committed against another, the result of absorbing the sight, sound, touch, and feel of the stories told in detail by a victim over and over and over. So it really disrupts your deeply held beliefs. The professional comes to doubt deeply held beliefs about safety and the inherent kindness of others. And I hope you're not one of those judges or attorneys, and I see it really with law students. You know, they first come so optimistic. By the third year, oh my goodness, you know, they hardly remember what their core values were. And so I think that recognizing it, and I ask you, does this sound familiar? It sounded familiar to me because at 2 o'clock I was waking up in the morning going, oh my God, was that the proper placement? Oh my God, how did we rule on that? Was that correct? And so often we're working relentlessly for the court or our clients, and often staying late at the office, skipping lunch, or skipping breaks to help our clients, to help people before the court. And what is compassion fatigue? In judges, it is the result of vicariously becoming worn down and emotionally weary from hearing about and dealing with situations where people have been physically and emotionally injured, hospitalized, and all too often killed. In addition, we as Native American judges may have an overlay of historical trauma. Pay attention. Due to the deliberate federal policies of assimilation and termination, we often overlook that historical trauma that has impacted each and every one of us as the indigenous people of the world. So be aware. What is historical trauma? And I borrowed this from, I put C there and I forgot to put her name in, but it's the renowned Janie Bigfoot, is that her name? She defines it as the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding across generations, including the lifespan, which emanates from massive group trauma. And these are pictures that speak for themselves. And so present generations, we often feel this repeated traumatic loss of relatives and community members through alcohol and drug-related accidents, homicide, suicide, DV, child abuse, and there's layers of present losses in addition to the major traumas of the past. That really fuels the anguish and the psychological numbing and destructive coping mechanisms. So pay attention, because not only do we have the historical trauma, we have the actual trauma and the vicarious trauma. That adds up to a lot, and a lot of us skip over it. So there is the impact of alcohol and drugs, of course, and I really wanted to cite to a Zuni study called Black Water by Christy Chapman. She's a UNM JD student, now soon to be lawyer, and she really showed the impact of alcohol on a pueblo such as Zuni. And as the increase in alcohol violations happened, it really decreased everyone's involvement in culture and tradition, and the criminal docket went up. And it's a very good, you can get it through the Tribal Law Journal at UNM. I encourage you to read it because it's very good, it's very succinct, and I think we can adapt it to our respective jurisdictions. And so what are the symptoms of compassion fatigue? Internalized symptoms include sleeplessness, eating disturbances, increased anxiety, depression, hypervigilance. We're all running around. How many have ever had sleeplessness? I see a few. Some of you are hardcore good sleepers. External, increasingly angry, irritable, intolerant of others, fearfulness, security consciousness, inability to make prompt decisions, increased difficulty focusing and concentration. Do you want your case to be heard by a judge who has both internal and external symptoms? Of course not. So one of the things that we said earlier is really spouses and significant others report that we suffer more symptoms than we are willing to self-report. Does that sound familiar? And I can just hear my kids and my spouse going, hey, we're not before your court, or we're not in your firm, you know, back off a little. So the research shows that we must address this compassion fatigue because it seems to peak at the 7-year mark. Many of us are over the 7-year mark, but we have to pay attention to that, okay? Those of you who are not. Okay, so this is long-term exposure. So what happens is it involves burnout. And I think I felt this when I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can get up today. And plus a negative shift in one's world view. And I really, working with law students, say, stick to your core values, stick to your world view, because you're going to put those aside so quickly if you don't pay attention. And so what is your fitness to be a judicial officer? Do a self-assessment. Okay, get your paper out, pencils. This is a class. I don't see anyone getting their pencils and paper out. You are, Susie? Okay, A's over here. You get A's. Okay, so reflect and jot down moments where you experience vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. Just think about that. What did it look like? How did it affect you? How did you manage it? What might you do differently? And quite frankly, I hate to share this, but I experienced it laying flat on my back in the hospital. And I knew exactly how I got there, but I didn't pay attention to it. And being hypervigilant, I thought, I'm gonna get out of here in less than 24 hours. 6 days later, I was still flat on my back in the hospital. Why? Totally ignoring these internal and external. So there are coping strategies, not just golf and alcohol, but real physical activity, rest, relaxation, positive social contacts, mindfulness, which we're going to hear about next, and Lori's going to share her medicine wheel in terms of personalizing a therapeutic plan for yourself. So, what happens when you don't deal with it? Poorly run courts, inefficient judicial administration, and systemic glitches. So, how can we prevent it? ABC. And I thought this really lines up with our tribal values, and the awareness is simply being aware in terms of, hey, I think I'm being a little bit reactive. Hey, I'm not sleeping at night. Hey, what about my court? How is it running? balance, that balance is always taught to us by our elders. Being in a balanced state, especially going on the bench. And the connection is probably so important in terms of the relatedness. And awareness, according to the research, is most critical because we work long hours. Take a picture of your office. I go, oh my God, do I have to? And car. Oh my God, it's NAICJA. I better clean my car. And no time for normal pursuits, plus poor physical health and issues with the family, it begins to snowball, okay? So balance and connection. Many of our judges can find strength in their communities. When I go home, oh wow, it's just like a therapeutic salve being poured over me. Why? You have your family, your relatives, your clans, you're in ceremony, you're dancing, you're eating your own indigenous food. So go to your culture, your tradition, your faith, and your colleagues. Why would you be around someone who just totally drains you every single day? Pay attention. So buffers, a healthy sense of humor. Yesterday I said laughter can build your immunity. Pay attention to that. Be an active listener, adequate sleep, good friendships, hobbies. I saw someone beading out here. That was so good. I thought one person gets it. And good vacations. How many of us are working while we're still on vacation? I'm not going to tell you who, but someone was working on a code on the way down while their husband was driving. No. Okay, healthy team environment, supervision and support. Again, the ABCs, awareness, balance, connection. So as judges, we must be alert to the compassion fatigue, establish clear boundaries. No is a complete sentence, okay? Acquire coping skills. Someone had to tell me that. And balance the rigors of work, okay? Take stock in being a judge. Realize this work is not just for everyone. Rotate on into other less stressful calendars. Take time off and even a sabbatical. Awareness, of course, reassess. Being a judge, continually attend to your spiritual, physical, and emotional health in a rigorous, disciplined way. And really, we need to hold ourselves accountable for our wellness. Remember, and I love this, so every time you're on the airplane, what do they say? Put on your own oxygen mask and then assist others. So simple, but excellent advice. Put on your own oxygen mask before you begin helping others. And so from the peacemakers, reflect, renew, refresh, redirect. Self-care, of course, but no, we want extreme self-care. Think beaches, because I really want to have the NAICJA conference in Hawaii, so I'm subtly getting that into your psyche. And healing, there are many ways to do your healing. And of course, as I said yesterday, shift to our resiliency. We are a resilient people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. There, now it's working. So Cheryl asked me to talk a little bit about what well-being is, as well as the neuroscience or the neurobiology of secondary trauma, and then about some tools for addressing that vicarious or secondary trauma. And I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time towards the end of my portion to actually try some of those tools out. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. First of all, what do we mean when we're talking about well-being? Some of you may be familiar, the American Bar Association just issued a report on lawyer well-being, and if you haven't read it yet, you might want to take an opportunity to take a look at it. Frankly, it's pretty dismal. The mental health of both lawyers and law students, and to some extent judges as well, they didn't focus as much on judges, is fairly depressing. But they have a number of suggestions in there. But they've defined well-being as a multi-dimensional term. It's not just one thing. It's not just taking care of our physical selves. It's a continuous process where we're hoping to thrive. That's not survive, that's thrive in the following areas: emotional health, our occupational pursuits, creative or intellectual endeavors, spirituality or some sense of a greater purpose in life, our physical health, of course, and then our social connections with others. It also, though, is the ability to make healthy, positive work-life choices. So we're not just reacting, we're responding to things. And we want to make those choices to assure a quality of life within our families and our communities, and this is true for judges and lawyers and others, make responsible decisions for our clients, if we're lawyers, or for those who appear before us, if we're judges. So, here is a non-expert's neuroscience. If any of you out there are neuroscientists, I apologize. This is sort of what I've learned about neuroscience over the past, almost 12 years in looking at this. The first is what I call the brain in the hand. So if you're willing, if you'll hold up either your right or your left hand, it doesn't really matter, and imagine that this is your brain stem. This is your thumb is the amygdala. So fold your thumb over into your palm. The amygdala is like our command center for safety, and so it's constantly scanning. Is it okay? Am I safe? Are there any threats anywhere? So it's on alert most of the time. If you fold over your hand, what you get is this prefrontal cortex. This is the more developed part of our brain. The part that stops and reasons and rations. So the amygdala might be saying, uh-oh, danger, danger. But the prefrontal cortex is going, oh no, that's okay. We're all right here. Everything's all right. You can calm down now. So keep this in mind because this becomes important as we go on. That's number one. Your brain is right here in your hand. Oh, the other thing about this is that when we're triggered, this is my favorite part of the brain in the hand, literally we flip our lid. So up goes the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala takes over, and you're just gone because it's in charge now and you flipped your lid. Your prefrontal cortex isn't working. So we're also hardwired for negative thinking. One writer describes this, Rick Hansen is his name, and he describes this as we are like Velcro for negative thoughts and Teflon for the good stuff. So we have to work pretty hard to get over that negativity bias. However, there's also good news. We are predisposed to empathy or kindness. For those of you who have small children, you might have had this experience where you're sitting in say a pediatrician's office and your child is pretty quiet and seems content and everything's fine, and another baby starts to cry, and suddenly yours is now crying too. There's that response. Somebody's suffering, somebody's in danger, and we're predisposed to be worried about that and to respond to it. The next one is that neurons that wire together, that fire together, wire together. So basically our experiences start to develop literally kind of grooves in our brain, these tracks of stimulus response experiences. The good news, though, is that this concept of neuroplasticity is that we change over the course of our lifetimes. I'm not sure, some of you are probably too young for this, but when I was growing up, I learned that, your brain is your brain and you're pretty stuck with it, and it doesn't change, and, if you mess it up, you're in serious trouble. That's true to some extent, but what we're finding out more and more is that the brain continues to evolve and can change over time. So this is good because those neurons that fire together, wire together, can be changed. We can change some of those behaviors and some of those reactions. So that's a little bit about the neuroscience, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk a little more about what Cheryl brought up in terms of trauma. Trauma is defined as a physical, cognitive, and emotional response to a distressing, negative event or situation. And the important thing to remember here is that trauma is subjective for most people. What I perceive as a traumatic event, you may or may not perceive as a traumatic event. So there is a subjective element there. And oftentimes we include both primary trauma, secondary trauma, and generational trauma. So when I was first in graduate school and working on the grief and loss degree, we started talking about this idea of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, and I really wanted to understand how it works. Why is it that this happens to us? And what can we do to change things, to lessen the impact of that? So we looked first at primary traumatic stress, and this is probably something that you're all familiar with. It is the typical response is the fight, flight, or freeze response. And there's also another one called tend and befriend, but we're going to focus on these three for now. So if you are being pursued by a large woolly animal years and years and years and years and years ago, your responses are fight, flight, or freeze. And hopefully you've been evolutionarily trained not to try to fight the big woolly animal. You're going to probably run away or freeze. But what is happening in your system as that is going on is that cortisol is being released. And that can be a good thing in that situation because you are in danger and you're being pursued and you need to survive this. So that cortisol gives you a really quick burst of energy. It heightens your memory functions. You remember where you can hide. You remember where you might be able to get away. You get a burst of increased immunity, so you're not going to, collapse right there. And you have a lower sensitivity to pain. So that bush that you just ran into that, cut your leg and you're bleeding all over the place, it doesn't hurt quite so much because you've got this cortisol rushing through your system. That's all really good in that situation. There is also, however, a counterpart to that. There's the relaxation response. So what happens when you've got that fight, flight, or freeze and it's over? You're safe now, the big woolly animal is gone. Your body is no longer in any perceived danger and your nervous system returns to normal. So you literally just calm right back down. And I had hoped to show you this video of a polar bear, but unfortunately we have a technological glitch and the video won't work. But let me describe it briefly to you. We have a polar bear who's being chased by a helicopter with a guy in the helicopter who's got a gun that he's going to sedate this polar bear with. And the polar bear is running, and you can watch the polar bear turn back, and he's watching the helicopter, and he's running and running and running, and he's shot, and then he's sedated. And after they get out and they tag him, you watch the polar bear, and the polar bear literally shakes it all off and takes 3 or 4 really deep breaths and then is just calm again. So he has literally shaken that stress off, taken a deep breath, and then he's fine. He's okay. So that would be ideal if we did that in stressful situations. But we're usually not chased by big woolly animals. We're usually dealing, unfortunately, with other kinds of stressors. We're dealing with the annoying person in traffic. We're dealing with the litigant or the lawyer in front of us who is once again being terribly unreasonable, and we've had an argument with our spouse, we've had an argument with a supervisor, and in those situations, it is not really socially appropriate to just shake it all off and take a few deep breaths. That stress accumulates over time. That stress that we're building up in our bodies by holding on to those stressful situations. And what results is we have this impaired cognitive functions, we get suppressed thyroid function, higher blood pressure, all those things that Cheryl was talking about. And we don't sleep well, and we're irritable, and life is not particularly good. With secondary trauma, we see something similar. We get these mirror neurons. I listen to difficult stories all day long, and my brain's mirror neurons, I'm basically responding to the person in front of me. Your brain doesn't necessarily know that that's not happening to you. The same part of your brain lights up as is lighting up in the person who's having the stressful event happen to them. So you are basically having a physiological response to that story and to that stress. So we're seeing the same kind of pattern, that we're building up the stress, we're holding on to it, it impacts our thinking, we start to see the world as a very negative place. But there's a piece in here about empathy, and this is a piece that I want to make sure that we're clear about. There's cognitive empathy, there's emotional empathy, and then there is something called empathic concern. This emotional empathy is what's happening when we're dealing with people in front of us who are having a very stressful event or who are telling a very difficult story. Empathic concern is really more of what we would call compassion. So the recent research shows that in fact, when we build our capacity for compassion, our empathic distress goes down. So the recent research shows more and more that what we're experiencing is not really compassion fatigue, it's empathy distress. We're so frustrated because we're having this response and we feel like we can't do anything about it. So what kind of tools can we do to help break this pattern? There's a gratitude practice, body awareness, mindfulness, personal medicine wheel, which Lori is going to talk about. If you do nothing else, a gratitude practice can be one of the most successful things to improve your well-being. There's just an abundance of research that shows that writing people thank you notes, thanking someone, even mentally, keeping a gratitude journal, counting your blessings, praying and meditating, help improve our well-being. Now, we don't know if it's causal. Are grateful people happy or are happy people grateful? We're not sure, but we do know that there is a relationship between the two. The other, and this has to do with body awareness, when we're under this much stress, we tend to disconnect from our bodies. We forget to eat, we forget to get up and move around, we numb, some of us overwork, some of us drink too much, we have a variety of ways. This is one of my favorite quotes. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. We think our bodies are here to carry around our heads, and we forget to be in touch with our bodies. And then there are mindfulness practices. So what is mindfulness and why practice? Mindfulness is an awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience. Or to put it more simply, it's slowing down the mind noticing as much as possible and acting thoughtfully based on what you have noticed. There are all kinds of benefits associated with mindfulness: reduced stress, better emotional regulation, those kinds of things. And I thought as I was preparing this that this particular video was so helpful. If you're not familiar with Dr. Michael Yellowbird's work, I'd really suggest you take a look at it. He talks about using mindfulness to decolonize, to overcome decolonization. He calls it neuro-decolonization. And he's preparing a documentary on mindfulness in Indian country, and I have a short video clip that I'd like to show you here. And this one, we are very hopeful will work. Oh, let's see, where did it go? Let's see if this is it. Nope. Back to, oh wait, it's down here. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. It's actually, it's on the desktop here, if I can figure out how to get to the desktop. We had it loaded over here. If we can get to the desktop, it'll come up. There we go, it's right there. Thank you. Perfect.
Meditation's in our way of life. A lot of people don't realize it, but it is.
You know, there's a lot of people who are very open, and then there's a number of people who kind of just brush it off and feel that that's not our way, you know, we don't do that. You know, some people see it as a Eastern philosophy, as Buddhism. However, we also have other natives who have described it as understanding that, you know, mindfulness practice is actually, to them, they believe it's a part of their traditional ways, and they understand how ceremony, anytime you're in ceremony or prayer, it's really a form of meditation.
While we're burning our sage, smoking ourselves down, we meditate. Prayer ceremonies, we meditate. Go to sweat lodges, we do our ceremonies in there. We sit there and we also meditate. We go to our vision quest, we meditate up there. We have it in our own culture. A lot of people don't realize it or even know that, but we do.
I feel like I walk in two worlds. Whereas, you know, I have this deep, profound passion inside for wanting to be connected to my ancestors, and you know, so I will sit in sweat lodge in prayer. I will, you know, pray with the community, and I will sing. However, on the other hand, I'm really profoundly connected and deeply passionate about science, and you know, the importance of science and the importance of being able to objectively test things in the world and make sure that things we say and try to do with people actually work.
So maybe by your next conference, he'll have the whole documentary ready. But I thought the trailer was really worth taking a look at. So we have just a few minutes left, and I thought if you didn't mind, we would actually try and have an experience, a short meditation, and you can see if mindfulness is something that might appeal to you. So if you would like, I can get you to just sit forward just a little on the front of your chairs. What you're hoping for is that your spine is upright, but that you're relaxed and alert at the same time. The hands can rest gently on your lap, either on your knees or folded, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And the eyes can remain open, or closed, or you could have just a soft gaze. And we'll start with just a little bit of mindful movement to help connect us with our bodies just a little. So if you put your hands out to the sides, and then as you inhale, slowly raise them up. And if you don't have room on your sides, you can do it just in front of you. So on the inhale, we want to go up. And then on the exhale, we'll bring the hands down again through the center of the body. Focusing on the breath. So again, inhale. And exhale. And again, inhale. And exhale. And resting your hands again in your lap. Simply bring your attention to your breath. Noticing where you experience the breath. You may notice it in your nostrils, or in your chest, or in the belly. And focusing again on the breath, you might begin to match the in-breath and the out-breath. Breathing in for a count of 4 or 5. And then exhaling for a count of 4 or 5. And again, matching the in-breath and the out-breath. And one more time. And then just releasing all control of the breath, letting it resume its normal rhythm. You may notice that your mind begins to wander. Just gently bring your attention back to the breath. And very gently bringing your awareness back into the room. And gently opening your eyes. So in closing, I will just say that there are mindfulness practices that focus our attention, practices that focus on the breath, And there are, of course, mindfulness practices that are designed to open our hearts, kindness and compassion practices. So if you're at all interested, I would suggest you find a practice that appeals to you, give yourself a little time, decide what's reasonable for you each day, and try it for a month and see how you feel. See if you notice any difference. And as part of my gratitude practice, I want to thank you all for your attention. Thank you. Okay. I've got yours all set up. Sure.
Hello. Okay, here I am. I'm going to talk a little bit about the medicine wheel and balance, and this is from the Anishinaabe point of view. It didn't even come up. It's not there. Something's not coming. There should be a wheel coming up, but not just the. Maybe I have to go to the. I don't think it is. See? It should be like that. Do you wanna, it's already in there, right? So how do I get out of this? Okay, let's go to the slideshow. Enter. No, it's not. Okay, I have to go back to the disk. So let's do this. Get out of here. There we go. Now from the beginning, slideshow. Okay, good. There it is. There is our wheel. This is how we see it. The east, the south, the west, and the north. The concept is the symbol represents many teachings to different tribes, and colors and quadrants can be different. The colors can indicate the 4 races of man: Asian, Indian, black, and white. Each direction has a medicine. Tobacco is our first medicine. That's what we offer when we go out anytime and we take anything that we need from nature. And then we have cedar, sage, sweetgrass. Each direction has a season, excuse me, spring, summer, fall, and winter. Each has an element: earth, air, fire, and water. The same as smudge. Oftentimes people talk about that smudge, and that smudge isn't just a smudge. That smudge is the earth, the air, the fire, and the water. The shell represents the water. The herb represents Mother Earth. We light it with fire, and the air takes it. And those are the 4 elements necessary for life that invoke the powers of life. So I just wanted to share that, because oftentimes people think that it's just a purification, and it's not just a purification, it's an actual ceremony. For Anishinaabe, the wheel starts in the east and moves clockwise through the directions, just like life, baby, youth, adult, and elder. Those are also teachings in that medicine wheel. Within that circle are the universal values and are taught through lessons. In the seasons are a way of life. Springtime is planting season. Natural medicines can be harvested at that time, and kinnikinnick can be harvested at this time. Spring ceremonies begin, fasting for a good year for what we will need. We feast our spiritual items during this time, and big drum ceremonies start. During the summer, food medicines are harvested at different times. Fall time is gathering time, as well as harvesting fish in preparation for the winter season. Winter time is story time and working on regalia, arts, and crafts. The medicine wheel is in perpetual motion and is referred to as natural law. Season cycles, life cycles, day cycle, year cycle, and then from there we go to boundaries, and time continues, season continues, life continues. That's the perpetual motion in that medicine wheel. A power greater than us gave to the people the gift of choice. Through that choice, we develop boundaries. When we know our boundaries, we are protected and know who we are. We change our boundaries by what we feel and who we are with. Developing spiritual boundaries gives us a balanced life. We develop our spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental well-being. Spiritual boundaries is our belief in our relationship with Creator. Emotional boundaries are response to others and how we relate with them. Physical boundaries are physical space and privacy. Mental boundaries are values, thoughts, attitudes, and opinions. Healthy boundaries give us self-respect, self-esteem, self-image, and self-worth. They give us confidence and a solid self-concept. This empowers us to make good choices and take responsibility for ourselves, always keeping the self and at the center of the wheel. Oops, I need to go back. The medicine wheel is designed to the ceremony of a sweat lodge. A sweat lodge is built in a half-moon shape. This represents the seen world, physical and emotional quadrant. The part of the circle you can't see is the unseen world and represents the spiritual and mental quadrant. The sweat lodge ceremony includes earth, air, fire, and water. I think all our ceremonies include those 4 elements necessary for all life. And those are natural elements necessary for all life. Without one, there would be no life. Prayer is to be thankful and to center ourselves. Feel is to have love and compassion for all life. Think or thoughts radiate to the outside world. And I think about that because a long time ago we were connected to Mother Earth. I mean, that's where all our ceremonies came from. Today you see people that'll bring a plant in the house. Oh, I love that plant. I think I'll bring it in. And I'm going to feed it, and water it, and nurture it. And that's the way we used to be as Native people. That's the way we are. But in today's world, people don't go out there and nurture Mother Earth like we should. We just choose to take one plant and take care of that plant. Act is to know you can change the outcome. So this too, the prayer, feel, think, and act is in that medicine wheel. And then the elders' advice, you create your own world with your thoughts. Think about what you're thinking about. Change your thoughts to change your world. You cannot change the past, but you can change the future. Remember, Creator gave you 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth. I heard that the 2nd time today. But the last thing I have to add is that the elder said, the longest journey is from here to here. That's it. That's it.
In closing, I didn't know if anyone had some comments or questions for the panelists. If you do, just raise your hand and we'll get you the mic. No? I think we're okay on Q&A. So, in closing, because you're here in the land of the balloon fiesta, my son shared this. He's a balloon pilot and has this balloon. And when you go on your first balloon ride, they do this absolutely beautiful prayer. And I want to share it with you as we close out this section. And here it is. Oh my goodness. I knew I shouldn't. Okay. May the winds welcome you with softness. May the sun bless you with its warm hands. May you fly so high and so well that God joins you in laughter and sets you gently back into the arms of Mother Earth. And I dedicate that prayer to NAICJA and to our conference goers. And so as we close out, one of the things that we're going to do is have a smudging ceremony. And so I've asked the board of directors, some of the judges, to help Brett and Judge Connors back there. And they have the sage, the sweet grass. I don't remember everything that's back there. But I think we can bring ceremony in to bring the sacred space into our conference and to kind of cleanse ourselves as we leave, okay? And so while they're doing that, all of you stand. Okay. I learned this from Akama. I think I shared it with you before. She did a mindfulness, but this is just a time out, okay? Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in peace, breathe out peace. Breathe in magnificence, hold it there, magnificence. Breathe out magnificence. Look to your left, look to your right. Tell that person, you are magnificent. Thank you. You can participate in our smudge on the way out. It's totally optional. The judges are back there, the staff is back there. In my language, with much gratitude, I say Ganesh Chish, a very, very warm thank you. And that's the end of this session.